Hey, hello, welcome to the stream, everybody. Today is Monday, the 8th of March, and today I want to talk about that heroic effort from Van der Poel and Von Black at the weekend at the Strade Bianche. It has created quite some discussion, and it's fascinating from a coach's perspective because so much data is available now, and I wanted to talk through it. So some of this has been brought up by a tweet sent by Neil Henderson. Now, for those of you that train at MapDeck, you will know this guy. He is the coach behind Apex Trading, who heavily influenced some of the stuff from the Sufferfest. And he's been responsible for some of those classic workouts that we all know and love down here. But also the idea of four-dimensional power and things like the Tour of Safalandria. And he was the first guy really on a commercial setting, I guess, to start saying there's something beyond FTP, which potentially has more relevance to how many more people ride, because FTP is obviously one metric in a very, very complicated human, and race dynamics are such that FTP isn't the big story. And anyone riding down here would know that, because there'll be some riders who could come down and do a workout like 9 Hammers, but then really suffer on a workout like the Wretched, and even though they've got the same FTP for both those workouts, there's always that underlying question as to go, what's going on here? And so this sparked up a little bit of interest on our local cycling club with one of the local racers who I've got a lot of respect for, said, yeah, a large FTP must play a role in his ability to recover between his attacks. At 12K out and at 500 meters out, can't be a bad thing when he has to ride 300 watts between the attacks and he's only in zone 2. That's really, really clever analysis, because once you're in zone 2, you can start recovering from those attacks. You can't really recover at FTP because your body's already at its maximum lactate steady state. So he has to be below that in order to make the recovery. And another rider there sounds like when I go riding with you. So Ben is a very young athlete and full of fast twitch muscles and has got an incredible sprint power on him. So this makes sense. Now, luckily, Van der Poel has made his data available on Strava, including all his power data. And I just want to throw a little bit of respect here to Chantal Black, who also won the women's race in an absolutely phenomenal position as well. But she didn't share her power data, so we've not got much to go on, sadly. That's the only reason we're not looking at that, but I'm pretty sure her numbers would reflect pretty much the same idea, because it's a very, very similar strategy. Anyway, back to this data here, and you can kind of see some of his stats that he's put in there aren't exactly right, but a normalized power of 389. But if we went back to that first slide, those last 60K, he was at 439 normalized power for almost an hour and a half. But the big difference there was really that he had a massive sprint. So that last 20-second sprint, he was putting out just over 1,000 watts. So the gap between that is massive. We can put that data into Xert. Now, we're massive fans of Xert down here. We coach with it a lot. For those of you who haven't come across it, and this graph at the top here is how Xert translate those data. So the red numbers are when he's above his threshold. And if you look very closely, I can't really point it out on here, but you can see where his threshold line is. And from where that green dot is, about the 3.5 hour mark, to where his second big attack was, he's roughly around his threshold line. But that purple line representing MPA, maximum power available, is fully recovered. Now, what's really intelligent here will be how he would be refueling, thinking about those attacks coming up, knowing how much he's got to burn, how long he can sustain those sort of efforts, and then having the massive amount of confidence it takes to just execute those. They weren't even wattage bazookas, they're like wattage atomic bombs. They're incredible. Anyway, and then down here, we got a little glimpse into his kilojoule burn, which I think is really, really fascinating. And that's something I want to cover in a second. But the big gap that we're talking about here, this is the race winning gap between threshold power and peak power. That's the bit that makes a difference. Being able to make those attacks, those moves, and then recover, make those moves again, recover. Van der Poel is training. He is training in the gym like a modern athlete. He is there doing hard and heavy strength training. There's a picture in here of him squatting something looks like at least body weight on that bar, but he's also doing those power moves. And anyone that's down here at Map Deck will recognize a lot of what he's doing in here. We do that a lot in our fitness classes. And he hasn't got his shirt off. He's not sweating. He's not like straining out one last rep. He is in control, solid, good biomechanics, getting that strength. And then the power you should see in this picture now of him is that adding that velocity to that force production and getting power. Then all we've got to do is transfer it onto the pedals. Race winner, I guess. And always looking after your recovery. Remember that thing that we talked about last time in the 1 watt a week coaching group that we have, and about putting effort into your recovery, because the quicker you can recover, the more you can train. And that's just something, this is the modern athlete at work, and it's working, you know. Okay, fascinating race. If you haven't seen it yet, go and watch it. The last sort of 20 odd K was just as exciting as ever. Such a good race. Okay, the next thing I want to move on to is a question that came up by one of our members in the Fast at 50 group, and that is to do with kilojoules. And we were talking about how the question came up, how do I know how much to eat? And the answer to that was, well, nowadays with modern technology, most of us have got some sort of a smart trainer, and are even starting to invest in power meters and a hell of a lot more. And this is equipment that really wasn't in our hands until very, very recently. We were working off things like heart rate and working on calories and that sort of thing. And it was so inaccurate that no one really bothered. But now with power meters, we can be a lot more accurate with that. Now, just very quickly, the problem with the heart rate based is that they relied on something called METs, metabolic equivalency tasks. Now, you can look at this up on the internet and Google it, and there'll be a whole document that just says, for this activity, no matter what it is, table tennis, cycling, cross-country skiing, it's saying that that task has a metabolic equivalency of this many calories per minute. And when it came to cycling, these tasks were basically easy cycling, moderate cycling, high intensity cycling, and it would work out how many calories. And anyway, it was so bonkers that most of us just looked at the gadget and went, no, that doesn't make any sense. And you know, your Garmin's pretty much still work off of this in terms of calories, unless you've got a power meter, in which case there is something different. Now, the great thing about power is that power is directly comparable to kilojoules, and kilojoules are, you can directly convert into calories. Now, I just brought up a unit converter here on Google just to show my thing. I'm going to come in here to energy. And if we go 1 watt equals how many kilojoules? 1 watt hour. So it's by 3.6. So 1 kilojoule is 1 watt for 1 second, so 3,600 seconds. Now we can start doing something with that data and converting it into calories. So let's say we have 200 watts for an hour gives us 720 kilojoules, okay? But what happens when we start converting that back into calories is something very kind of strange and confusing happens, where I guess a lot of us are getting a bit stung with it. Because when you look at the back of your food packet, you will see a kilojoule value and a calorie value. Now, if you go onto the NHS guidelines, they'll show you how many kilojoules it should be for an adult male. It's about 10,500, and how many calories is 2,500. So it's roughly 4 times. But when you start looking at your Garmin's and you're looking at your kilojoules and your calories, or even in Xert and in Strava, and in case in point, let me just bring that back up. You can kind of see here that Van der Poel 5,450 kilojoules, but 5,452 calories. So that's almost like for like. But then if you compare that to Xert, for instance, Xert have got that at 5,417 kilojoules and 5,559. So there's a big difference in there about how they're doing the conversion. And we can look at that in this. So let me just come back to here. Now let's plug some of that data in. Let's have a look at Xert, for instance, 5417 kilojoules. Convert that into kilocalories gives us 1,294. Now, if we can convert that back we end up with a metabolic equivalency of about 26%. Now you do that the same with the Strava data, and that comes at about 23%. So what these two bits of software are doing is trying to give a metabolic gross efficiency, sorry, I'm getting all tongue-tied to this. So imagine that the human body isn't 100% efficient. So we've still got to power our brain, we've still got to power our lungs, still got to power our heart. All those things that make us a human requires energy, and we expel most of that as heat. Now, without a lot of scientific testing, it's quite hard to know what that is, but these gadgets are trying to guess it for us. Now, a very, very fit would be 26%. Most of us are probably more like 20% efficient. So my advice here is, if you've got something like a power meter, stick to using kilojoules. But if you are going to be using calories, just be aware and work out for yourself what the gross metabolic efficiency scale that is being applied in your gadget, so you've got a better understanding of where it's all going. Because maybe on a short ride doesn't make that much difference, but on a really long ride it can add up to a fairly big difference. And the difference between, I know stages use about 21 and Xert using 26 can be a pretty big gap, and it's definitely something to be aware of. More on that in one of our coaching groups when we can cover that in a little bit more detail and going through some individual examples. Cool. So one last thing then is, whole point of this stream is really just to talk through how Xert is working for my fitness, and hopefully you guys can pick up some bits and pieces as you go. Now for me, slowly bringing myself back to fitness after a lot of working hard over COVID, keeping an eye on the business, and I'm really keen to get back to that. I'm here just about hitting my second star, and it's showing that I'm pretty tired after a 6-hour mountain bike ride. To be honest, I'm not as tired as it makes out, but I'm not going to correct anything. If I come across here into my goals, it's got me neutral, and I'm just going to keep that where it is. I'm also pretty happy that down here, if I stay on track with my program, I should be looking at 283 watts by my target date, which is well above my goal that I set myself. So it's nice to stay a little bit ahead. I don't need to chase it. That's all good. Now, one thing that's just worth looking at is in this progression graph. Let me just come across and move me out of the way a wee bit. Now, this progression graph, we've been talking about this black line, and just making nice, steady progress on my training load. But look what that 6.5 hour ride did. I have not done a big ride like that for a long, long time. And it was great. It was brilliant. It was just such a fantastic ride. But what would have been better if I had done a little bit more on Saturday and not packed so much into Sunday, because we've got this big spike here in training load and then this recovery. And this is really the sort of situation that we're trying to avoid by using something like Xert. We were trying to get this nice, steady, sustainable fitness build and avoid this big peaking and troughing. So, okay, I've done that. You know, this is what's so great about Xert and the adaptive training program, is that I can now look at some of the advice it's going to give me, get myself back on track, and try not to make too much of a habit of it, and avoid this big peaking and troughing, which really doesn't help our fitness. It ends up just stabilizing out and we don't really make progress. So that's just something I'm going to keep in my mind as I go through the week. But I'm going to click into training and see what sort of advice it gives me. Now Monday, I don't normally train on a Monday because Paddy and Kath will be here on the turbo trainers. So it's normally my night that I jump into the kettlebell classes and get a little bit of strength work done. And yeah, absolutely, you can see here, we've got a training surplus of 85, still telling me to take a recovery, and its estimated breakdown there until next workout is 1.4. Remember, that is to make 0 progress, so to recover from that. So I'll be looking to train tomorrow, where I'd imagine that I'll be in a slight training deficit, and we've got that threshold session to do tomorrow as well, so look out for that. Brilliant. Okay, I hope that was useful to you. That was a hell of a weekend. I hope you all had as much fun as I did. I'll see you in tomorrow's stream, and I'll answer any more of your questions then. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.